Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining and for checking out this new series. My name's Josh. If you don't know me already, I do videos about Excel and leveraging some of the visual design features to do a little bit more with your data, communicate more effectively with your data, and help give people more actionable insights. Many people have asked for a full walkthrough of this large e-commerce dashboard behind me, and I think it's actually a great example to show off all the different types of features I use and the process I use to build these kinds of dashboards in Excel. So this is going to be a longer form series. We're going to go much deeper than we do in the other videos here on TikTok. I'm going to show you every single step, start to finish, for building something like you see here behind me. So before we dive in, I think it's important for me to just show you around a little bit so that you kind of understand where we are each step of the way. It's going to help this whole thing make more sense to you as we dive a little deeper into how it's done. So we have a dashboard behind us. This dashboard's made up of pivot charts and metrics, and it also has some slicers over there on the side. Those slicers are like filters, so you can drill into each region. These are mostly powered by pivot tables. So we have a separate sheet made up of pivot tables here. These pivot tables are coming from our source data. And what I mean by that is that every pivot table is powered by a regular old table in Excel. And those regular tables are kind of where you'd be like adding in new data each month or something like that. So in this case, our data is a bunch of sales by different product categories in different regions and stuff all around the world. And maybe each month we might go into the bottom of this and add more data to it, or copy paste data into the table to make it bigger so that our whole dashboard kind of updates automatically to reflect that. So raw data in one table, a pivot table sheet that is just made up of pivot tables from that same source table, and then a front end dashboard that is like what you're actually showing people. So typically when we start a project like this, we're just starting with a big table of data. Now you might be getting this data as like an export from some tool you use at work. You might be manually creating this table each week or each month or each day. Either way, there's some important things we have to look out for. So the first one is make sure that your data is in a table format. If you just have data on the page and it's not in a table format, you can just select all of it, go to the Insert tab and hit Table, and that's going to turn it into a table. And then I also suggest going under the Table tab and giving it a name. This is in the upper left here. I call this one sales just because it's the sales breakdown, but you can call it whatever you want, something easy to reference in the future. That's going to come in handy later. For what we're doing today, we need a properly structured table, meaning a single header, no merged cells. Each column has to have consistent value types, consistent formatting, not like weird multi-layered things with merged cells and all of that. Clean, simple lines of data in each column that are consistent value types, and a single header, no merged cells anywhere. We could still build a dashboard if we didn't have nicely structured data like this. It would just be a little harder to do, and it would be a little harder to add in filtering and all the other kind of features. So for this example, just make sure you're starting with data that is properly formatted and cleaned up already. If you're struggling to figure out where to get some data to start with for this sort of thing, Microsoft has its own sets of Power BI sample data, which can just be downloaded as an Excel file, and they work really well for this. I believe it's on like learn.microsoft.com. If you just look up at Power BI sample data, you'll find some really great examples. And they're all structured already, nice and clean, single header. They'll work well for this kind of example. So I'm going to create a new worksheet here. And this worksheet is where all of our pivot tables are going to go. Now, if you're not familiar with pivot tables, this is a pretty critically important skill to have in Excel. I think it's one of the most powerful features in Excel and most useful features to learn about. I'm not going to go into a whole course on pivot tables right now, but I'll give you the basics and show you the process. So under the Insert tab, we're going to go to Pivot Table. Remember how we named our table earlier? We're just going to put that name in here, hit enter. So we're going to see some options here. These are each of the columns from our source table, and we can put them together in different ways to get different types of insights. So for example, if I want a breakdown of sales by order date, I'm going to put order date in my rows, and then for my values, I'm going to select sales, and it's now going to break down every single sale by order date. Now, here's the thing. I don't want this grouped by day. That's too much granularity. We want something a little broader. We want it maybe more by month because we're covering a large period of time. So I'm going to click into my table here, and then under the Pivot Table Analyze tab, I'm going to go to group selection, and in this little window, I'm going to click months, and then I'm going to hold control and hit years. I'm going to click month, and then I'm going to hold command and hit years as well. And I'm going to hit OK. And now this is going to automatically group our data by month and year, and this metric is now aggregated according to that, and it does that automatically. I'm going to do a couple other things to clean this pivot table up. I'm going to right click on my sum of sales value here and go to field settings. I'm going to go to number. I'm going to hit currency, and I'm just going to make sure there's 0 decimal places because I don't need the decimal places. And then I'm just going to hit OK. There we go. Now these numbers are formatted properly. I'm going to do one other thing. I'm going to go to the design tab. I'm going to go to grand totals off and subtotals. Don't show subtotals. And that's so we're just not showing the sums for each year here because we're actually not going to use those in this example. Okay, now we have a nice clean pivot table showing our sales broken down by month over time. Super useful. That's going to be part of our data. So why are we doing this step before we even know what we want to put on our dashboard? Well, there's a few reasons. I like to do one sample pivot table because it's a good way to kind of explore your data, look at the time period that your data covers, look at kind of the formatting of the data, if there's any issues in your data. That's going to get uncovered here now. And you want to know that before you start designing and building everything up. I'm just going to show you one other thing here just for context because this is going to be a big part of the process later on. Under the insert tab, when we're clicked into a pivot table, if we select pivot chart, it's going to drop in a bar chart of the data in our pivot table. And if we click into that bar, we can go to design, the design tab, and go to change chart type and turn this into whatever chart type we want. You know, of course, we can format this, do everything we want to it later on. This is going to be kind of the foundation of everything we do as we build out this dashboard. So we've put in a pivot table. We've kind of explored the formatting, made sure that we have data across time. We kind of know what time period we're working with here. We have a good sense of the fact that the data is actually there because the pivot table is able to aggregate it properly. Things are looking pretty good. So now it's time to start thinking about what we actually want to put on our dashboard. So we're going to drop in a new worksheet here and name our old one. This is going to be our pivot tables sheet. And we're going to create a new one here. Let's call it one dashboard. It's time to start thinking about what we want to put in. So we've got a lot of options. And I'll start by saying I typically do this exercise with actual pen and paper. So I literally draw this out in a notebook to kind of start sketching things and get a sense of what I want in each place. It's kind of like a wireframing exercise. For us to start doing this though in real time here in the dashboard in the sheet, we're going to look back at our raw data and we just need to figure out what's in here, what we want to focus on, and what kind of insights we want to highlight. So I'm just going to zoom in here so you can see what we're working with. So essentially we've got individual orders in this table, meaning somebody makes an order or purchase, and each row represents one individual order or purchase. Got a customer name, how it's shipped, the state that they're in, how big of a sale it was, the quantity of items, if there's a discount applied, how much profit is from that particular sale, how much profit there is from that particular order, the segment, meaning is it corporate, consumer, home office? That's like if you have different product segments. A region, meaning are they in the central, west, south? This is in the US, region of the US. Product subcategory or category. So is it furniture? If it is furniture, what type of furniture? In this case, bookcases. And then we've got a bunch of order date data here that's a little messy. We have day of the week listed here in what looks like German. So we're going to probably ignore those, but we do have just a standard order date over here, or order date as month, year, and some preparation. So we essentially know, okay, we're looking at individual orders. We have them categorized pretty well here. We have locations around those orders. We have pretty much everything we need. And the main metrics here that we're probably going to be focusing on are sales and profit, maybe quantity and discount, but I think sales and profit are the main focus here. So now we kind of know what data we're working with. And to turn that into this whole thing you see behind me, we also really need to understand, this is such a critical skill. Can't emphasize this enough. To design a useful report that somebody actually is going to want to look at on a regular basis, you need to know who that person is. So who are we building this for? I think in this example, maybe we're building it for like regional directors, and maybe it's something that's used by like vice presidents. So we're building this for maybe a higher level viewer. We also need to know what level of technical skills they have. How familiar are they with data? How familiar are they with kind of data principles in general? In this case, let's say we're working with somebody who's, relatively technical but not super technical. It's the kind of person who wants to be able to compare different regions or product subcategories, but they're not necessarily the kind of person who's going to be like running their own independent analysis on the data. They're kind of just wanting to say what direction things are things moving in, how do these different areas, regions, or product categories compare to each other. They're doing pretty surface level analysis, so we know to kind of tailor it to them. If this was getting shown to a data analyst or somebody more technical, we'd probably go a little bit deeper, we'd probably show a little bit more data, we'd probably give more control to them, and sometimes even you don't even need to visualize anything if you're showing it to a data analyst. They just want hard data so that they can mess with it themselves. On the flip side, if your audience is somebody who's not technical at all, who you really have to handhold and explain each metric to, then you're going to maybe simplify things a little bit, show less data, give a lot more explanation in there, add more contextual information like actually explaining things in text so that they can read it and understand what they're looking at. And if they're not very technical, you might not give them as many filter controls, because if you do, they might start digging into the data in a way that is just going to confuse them and lead to the wrong insights. So knowing your audience is so critical, and I can't emphasize enough how much it will help you build something useful if you understand who you're giving it to and what their needs are. Alright, so we've headed back over to our dashboard page. First thing we're going to do, we're just going to drop a background color. So just Command A, drop in a color that you like. In this case, I am doing a green color because it's a green theme. For anybody who wants to duplicate the exact color scheme at home, this is hex color value BBF7E5. For a lot of light themes, where you see like lighter color palettes, what we're going to be doing is giving like a fairly faded out, not very bright background color. So you'll notice in the color wheel, it's towards the center and it's on the lighter side of the spectrum. We don't want something super bright, super saturated for our background color in this example, because what we're going to do is we're going to float essentially white rounded rectangles on top of this. So we want something kind of faded out. If you're doing your own at home and you want to do a different color, the basic guideline is pick something that's not super saturated or super intense. We want this to be a fairly washed out color, but we don't want it to be pure white in this example, because we're going to be floating white rectangles on top of it. So just anything other than that, but still not super saturated, is going to work for this. Now on top of this, we're going to drop in a rounded rectangle. Under the Insert tab and Shapes, there's a rounded rectangle option. And we're going to make this just about as big as our working area here. So a couple things here. You can change the roundedness by clicking this area in the upper left hand section. We don't want it super round here. And then we're going to style this and set the size. So first thing we do, you can double click on this to open up the formatting pane. Sometimes that will open up the text box, so just you might have to try a couple times to get the formatting pane to open. And in your formatting pane, you can give it a fill color and a line color. So we don't want a line in this case, so no line, and we want our fill color in this case to be a white. So we just go fill color, solid fill, and then give it a white. If you're struggling to size this, in this example, I'm just essentially saying desktop screen, I want it to fully fill the screen at 100% zoom. If you look at the bottom right here, you can see how zoomed in you are. In this case, I think it's about 10 by like 22 inches. We can double click to open the format pane, and then in the format pane under size, see our exact size. So looks like in this case, me just kind of estimating it by eye, we're at 10.25 inches high by 22.21 inches wide. You don't have to be exact in this case, but that's just roughly what works for me to have this show up kind of full screen on a desktop. This is going to kind of set our working area for the rest of the project. This is our aspect ratio we're going to use. Unlike websites, Excel doesn't have the ability to have things dynamically change layout and size based off of your screen size. So we're kind of stuck with the same aspect ratio. In this case, aspect ratio meaning the same ratio of height to width. It's going to kind of always have that when we display it. So it's important to know what kind of device somebody's going to be viewing this on. You know, in this case, primarily they're going to be viewing it on laptops, so this size should work. So now I need to kind of figure out what sections I want within this. So I'm just going to copy paste my background rectangle here, Control C, Control V, and then I'm going to give it a slightly different fill color, in this case just a really light gray so I can see it on the background, and I'm going to kind of adjust the size a little bit. Okay, so I know I want a couple of different things here. I want to have a main dashboard section on the right, and I want to have a little subsection for a nav in the upper left, along with some filters and stuff on the left as well. So I'm kind of getting nav elements over to the left, contextual elements, that sort of thing over on the left, actual dashboard on the right. So first I'm just kind of blocking in as much space as I think I'll need for the dashboard itself over here. So for folks just following along at home, we've used just a fairly light gray here. The hex color is E8, E8, E8 if you want to duplicate it, or the RGB is 232, 232, 232 on the red, green, and blue here. Now I also, again, I know I wanted a little subsection where we might have some filters, that sort of thing. So I'm just going to copy paste this again and resize it. I think it's going to take up a good chunk of the page over here. And I'm going to have these overlap a little bit so that it kind of the shape just naturally extends a little over to the side. Every step of the way when you do these kinds of projects, think about padding. Is this amount of padding here? See this white section in the background? Is this the same size as the amount on the bottom? Do we have the same amount of padding all around the edge? That kind of organizational step, huge difference in how professional your work will look. I'm actually going to just move this one up a little bit here. I think I'm going to want that extra space. I noticed on my original design I lifted it up a little bit, which might not be necessary, but it just kind of looks cool. And I'm leaving enough space up here for the little nav element we saw before. I'll explain how to do all that in a sec. Keep in mind, as you readjust the size of your rectangles, you will have to readjust the roundness because the roundness will change as you resize them. So I am just going to try to keep my roundness as consistent as I can on these. We can't manually set it, so we just have to kind of use our eye to get as close as we can. Okay, I like this. Now you'll notice a little faint line right here. This faint line is basically just because I used a gradient fill on this one. So I basically used that same gray we used before, and then on the other side, I've just taken the brightness setting on the gradient on one for the same color and just increased it or decreased it a little bit. You don't have to do this. You can just use a solid fill with the same color. Sometimes I add in gradients just to add a little bit of depth. All right, and now I'm going to start blocking in the subsections within this dashboard. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get this white rectangle in the background. I'm going to just copy paste it in, shrink it way down, and then I'll use this as my little building block to figure out what sections I want on the page. So when you're figuring out the layout of lots of different sections like this for all your different charts, we are getting into a little bit of the realm of art and design more than technical Excel skills here. But the key is really just trying to keep things as organized as you can. And you're just going to kind of have to do your best here oftentimes. So whenever possible, we want to keep consistent sizing around the cards. And when I say card, I mean like each of these little sections that will have different charts and visuals on them like you see. So like in this example behind me, you can see we've tried to keep each of these sections relatively similar in height, right? Each card has about the same height. And then the combined height of this card is exactly 2 of these cards combined. This card is the same height as the card next to it. Wherever possible, we try to keep that consistency. So I have a general sense that I'm going to have something that's going to be about 3 cards high and maybe 4 cards wide in this example, because I want not necessarily 12 charts, but I know I'm going to have like at least 8 of them, and I want to have room to make some of those charts 2 cards high or 3 cards wide, etc. So I'm not just going to design it for 8 cards. That wouldn't give me enough space. I'm going to design it for a little bit bigger. I'm going to go with 12 in this case, essentially 150% of whatever total number of cards. So if it was 12 cards total, we're thinking about this then as being 3 high and 4 wide. So if I click into this background shape here and look at the size, I'm seeing that the height of this is about 9.69 inches high. Now, if I broke that down into 3 sections, we'd be looking at something a little more than 3 inches per card, but that would then fill in the entire space. We don't want that. We have to add padding, etc. So just I'm roughly doing the math here. I'm considering card size plus padding between the cards. I think we want this to be about 2.9, maybe 2.89 if I remember from the original example high. And now let's copy this and paste it. Yeah, great. So at 2.89 inch height, that kind of gives us roughly enough space to have padding between each card. So here's an important trick for getting things aligned and organized on your pages. Each of these, hold shift, click each one. That's going to multi-select the shapes. Under your shape format tab, we're going to go to the align option. So we're going to do a few things. First, we're going to align left, and that is going to align everything along the same edge so that we know that they're all perfectly aligned along one edge. So that we know that they're all perfectly flush along one edge. And then we're going to go to distribute vertically, and that's going to make sure we have exactly the same amount of spacing in between each one. All right, and that looks pretty good. So now you can imagine if we copied this, pasted it a few times, we could start to figure out how wide we need it to be to have 4 units. Now, as you can see, it's a little too big here, right? So I'm going to just go and I'm going to select each one. Again, we're holding shift and clicking. I've clicked into all of these. Now I'm going to grab the little thing on the corner here and shrink it down a little. All right. And then I'm going to move in my furthest left elements. So I'm going to hold shift to select all those. I'm going to move these in a little bit, get them to the point where they have enough padding on the left. And then I'm going to grab the top row, 1, 2, 3, 4, holding shift to click them all, go back to that distribute evenly option under the shape format align tab, and let's see how that looks. Okay, we're really close here. We just need a little more space for padding. There we go. I think that looks pretty good. And as you make tiny adjustments, you can always click back in and use that distribution tool again to make sure everything's aligned right. We don't need this perfect right now. I can't emphasize that enough. We're just looking to generally have a sense of what even spacing would look like, and a general sense of what our width would be for each element. So now that we have a loose sense of how big each unit is going to be in this whole dashboard, we can start breaking it into actual sections for our data. Hey, this is Josh from the future. So that's the beginning of part 1. I'm working on editing part 2 right now. It should be ready sometime in the next couple of days. If you have questions, comments, or things you want me to go deeper on, let me know. I will try to get those added. And if you haven't liked or subscribed, please do. It really helps. I'm a tiny little channel here on YouTube, so every little bit really helps us grow. And of course, if you want the newsletters with the templates or any of that kind of stuff, I've got some links below in the description. So thanks so much, everybody. Have a good one, and I'll be back soon with part 2. Bye for now.